Center. And it is for me an honor and a pleasure to welcome you today to this session organized by the Bioinfo for Women program at the BSc. So this is the starting of the WOW week dedicated to Women's Health Awareness Week. This is going to be a very intense and interesting week here at BSc, I guess in many other places around the world too, in which we will have a number of activities in discussing and promoting the study of the problems related with women's health from a biological and also from the computational point of view. For today, we have two speakers, Simona and Davide and Simona, that will introduce us in two of the areas that are now more, I would say, hot in this topic of sex and gender biases and women-related health problems. So without more introduction, I'm happy to give the floor to the first speaker, Davide Cirillo, that is the head of the new unit for artificial intelligence in the life science. After his talk, we have some time for questions, and we have opened a channel on the YouTube in which you can put your questions, and we will read them from here and transmit them to the speakers. So please, Davide, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alfonso. So my name is Davide Cirillo. I am the leader of the machine learning for biomedical research here at the Life Sciences Department of the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. And with this presentation today, I would like to give you an overview of the status of our knowledge and research on sex and gender bias in artificial intelligence. So let's start from highlighting the importance of artificial intelligence for precision medicine. So artificial intelligence is allowing us not only to collect all the information that precision medicine as a new paradigm of medicine needs in order to deliver better diagnostic tools and treatment recommendations. All those aspects that you can see here, all those individual characteristics, not only to collect them, but also to interpret them and to the decision that they take, or maybe those are just mirrors that that reflects the information that is presented, and so we need to be more careful in the data and the information that we present to them. So
no se oye, aparentemente. Está diciendo que no se oye.
Okay, there are technical problems.
Yes.
Now they are solved. Okay, so there has been some technical problems, but I think that now this is fixed. Okay, perfect. So so let's resume. So I was talking about the importance of artificial intelligence in precision medicine, but also the questions that we have to pose in terms of our trust in those systems. So those are really neutral systems that we can trust blindly, or maybe those are just mirrors of that reflects the information that is presented, and so we have to really think carefully on the type of information that are presented to those systems, and this is really relevant in particular for health applications. So in order to understand this point about trust of artificial intelligence, I would like to play a game with you. So imagine that you have been asked to label those pictures using those categories, old and young. And you know that these pictures are going to be given to, be used to train an artificial intelligence system for making, for instance, classification or other tasks. So in this case, I think that most of us are going to agree that the person that is represented on the left is an older individual with respect to the one represented on the right. And we can agree on this. This is an information that is somehow like we can infer from by looking at these pictures. Anyhow, you are also asked to label those pictures based on other types of categories, like for instance, skinny and fat. This is a bit more complicated because, first of all, it's not really, I mean, we cannot really say much about the body weight of those individuals just looking at the face. I mean, to me, for instance, like I can maybe say that the person on the right, the shape of the face is a bit more rounded than the one on the left. But I don't know, for instance, if the one of the left, if there are individuals that are skinnier than that. So I don't really have a view of the entire spectrum. So this is a bit complicated, a bit dodgy situation with those categories. Now imagine that you are asked to label a picture based on these categories, smart and not smart. Like, this is really impossible, and it's really not, I mean, there is something like a bit controversial about this, I would say, because definitely this is something that cannot be extracted from an image. The only thing that I can say is maybe that the man on the right is smiling and the one on the left is not, but maybe not because it's kind of smirking. So it's like, it's very, very strange question to be posed, and probably not very appropriate to pose. Well, these type of questions are from a publication from last month in which they did exactly this. They took a lot of people, a crowd of people, they asked them to label those pictures with subjective labels, and then they train an artificial intelligence system to classify those pictures. And it's, I mean, the paper itself, from a technical point of view, is very sound, is incredible. It's really interesting, actually, what they have done. But of course, like these superficial face judgments that they are introducing, that they are, you know, creating a model for, are really borderline with, you know, ethics and, you know, evaluation that we really need to be very careful with, especially if this system is created and put out there in the, you know, like in the wilderness, let's say, like that people can use it. Some of those labels are like, for instance, familiar, memorable, smart, something that is really subjective, and that was actually the purpose of the project, and I understand this. But this is an example of something for which we really need careful consideration. Like in the paper, the authors also, of course, identified some correlations between those labels. Of course, they found, for instance, that some categories like white, looks like me, privileged, those are correlated among them, because this is reflecting essentially like the composition of this crowd of people that judged those images. So it's, you know, both interesting in one way, like as a social experiment, but also very dangerous. And this is the take-home message of all this. Even more, considering that they went farther and they also used this information that has been learned in order, for instance, to convert a not so smart looking picture into a smarter looking picture. And this is, of course, like definitely very, very, you know, we have to take this with a grain of salt, let's say, in terms of applications. They patented this a couple of months before publishing the paper, which also, like, you know, somehow say much about the motivation behind this work. And this, of course, has been like in the last weeks, in the last month, very much debated in social media, because as Iris van Rooijs wrote in a thread that I actually recommend you to check out, by automating these prejudices, we are actually reproducing them, we are amplifying them, and we are, in particular, normalizing them. And this is the problem. It's not the social experiment by itself, which is also even interesting, but it's what is done with these tools. And of course, all this is not just about sampling bias or any different types of bias that we have, because we might have many of them. And indeed, they can seep into the different steps of the life cycle of AI development, which is here represented. We can have biases that refers merely to the data generation, like, for instance, historical bias, representation bias, measurement bias, and also biases that refers to the model building and its implementation, like, for instance, aggregation bias, the way we evaluate the biases, evaluation bias, and then the deployment bias, so when and where we deploy our system. So it's a very complex landscape. And just to give some examples in the biomedical field, we can, for instance, have the case of genomics. Here we have like it has been observed a representation bias in many genome-wide association studies, in which essentially we have just a partial representation of reality. We only have like a majority class that most of the time is a white middle-aged man of European ancestry, and we miss all the other categories, and in particular female. In this example, this is basically showing what we should be able to see in this kind of studies, differences between the two sexes in terms of the loci in which those variants appear. Another example is in digital medicine. So this is a case of deployment bias. So where, if we develop a system, for instance, that is using mobile phones, of course, this technology must be accessible. And so when we deploy this system in different countries, we need to take this into consideration, because in some places, maybe this technology is not even accessible. Like is the case of mobile phones, you can see in the different places of the world, this is the probability that a woman is less likely to own a mobile phone with respect to a man. And you can see that in Europe it's quite balanced, but for instance in South Asia it's quite skewed, this probability. So this is something that we have to take into account. The landscape of biases is very complex. I'm just giving you some examples, and there has been like a lot of effort in the literature in order to categorize them. One of those efforts comes from Ricardo Baeza-Yáez. He categorizes biases into those three categories: statistical bias as a significant systematic deviation from a prior unknown distribution, cognitive bias as a systematic pattern of deviation from norms and rational judgment. This is basically let's say an individual bias, while a group bias is called a cultural bias, that is interpretation and judgments phenomena acquired throughout the life of a group of people in a specific place, in a specific time. So by looking at this, it seems that everything, like the problem is about the data, which I have to say that in the case at least of biomedical, the biomedical field, most of the time it's the case. Indeed, here you have a representation of one of the different actions that are done in the field of biomedicine, and that can lead to the generation of biased data. This is the path that leads to the development of a drug, and we can see that biased data can be produced at all the different steps, from the preclinical studies to the clinical studies. Then, if those clinical studies have been done only on male, we put on the market a drug that it will be inevitably show side effects in women, as it is shown in this picture. Now, the problem is that each one of those steps will produce data, and we can get this data and we can train artificial intelligence system, and we have to be very careful on the possibility of finding those biases in this data that we are using, as we saw before. This is just an example of the sex differences that must be taken into account, for instance, at the level of preclinical studies. This is probably something that is not, I mean, for people that are not experimental people, they don't really think about that, but this really makes sense because you are collecting data that reflects only one side of the physiology of those animals. This is for mice, and as you can see, there are really two different cell types that are mediating the pathway of pain, for instance. So if you are these studies in rheumatology, you want to know what is happening in the physiology of female and male animals as well before going on with the development of a drug. At the level of pharmacovigilance also, we can really like appreciate those differences and learn something from it. This is a study that has been coordinated by a postdoc in the lab, John Sanchez-Weyer, in collaboration with the Instituto Gulbenkian de Ciencia in Portugal. And basically here you can see the trends in the co-dispensation of drugs associated with women and men in three different parts of the world. Here in Spain, in Catalonia, in the United States, in Indianapolis, and in Brazil, in Blumenau. And the red curves essentially indicates the probability that a woman is administered drugs that are interacting among them and creating some toxic effect, while the blue line is for men. And so you can see that this red line is in most of the cases always higher. So there is more probability that a woman go to the pharmacy and is given a drug that is actually interacting with another drug that this person is already taking. Now, an interesting observation is that while this is very apparent in Catalonia and Blumenau, in Indianapolis is not really like that, and this is because there is a private health system. So alternatives to those drugs are more available, and so like these differences are less visible. In other parts of the world, of course, this is not the case. So this is a kind of data that we can see, that we can get, and we can use to study those differences and to understand if by using this data in artificial intelligence we are introducing or not a bias that is depending maybe on some aspects, something that we are not really controlling for. Okay, this information is also available in a web page that is called this is the DD Interact, and you can use it. Something that we also are very active into is like to have a view of what is the status of these biases in the data that is available out there. For instance, in the large biomedical repositories, and we analyze the status of bias in human data repositories in the context of a biohackathon that was organized last year by the Elixir network of bioinformatics resources. So essentially what we did was to analyze the metadata associated with the samples and the studies that are deposited in two of the largest human data repositories. One is dbGaP in the US, and the other one is the European Genome Phenome Archive. So as you can see, just from those bar plots that represent the percentage of the categories of male, female, and unknown that are present in the samples collected there, you can see that in dbGaP we have a lot of unknown samples. Basically, those are samples that for which the sex category has not been reported, or that we don't know. So we don't know what they are, if they comes from a male or a female individual. In Europe, the situation is a bit different, but more interestingly than this, we can have a look at the evolution of this situation over time, since the beginning, the inception of those database. So in the case of dbGaP, we can see on top the evolution of the accumulation of those samples samples over time, okay. Then in the second plot, we can see the percentages of those categories, male, female, and unknown in the samples, and we can see in this yellow line that basically, at least in the case of the United States, is quite stable and quite high, which means that there are a lot of samples that are unknown every year. And then even more interesting on the bottom, we have the amount of samples that are reported with the sex categories in the studies. And so here you can see basically that the orange line is quite flat and is again very high, which means that a lot of studies are using samples that for which we have the female and male information, but also mixing unknown samples, and this is quite worrying. In Europe, the situation is a bit better. So you can see that in the second line, we started very badly. We have a lot of unknowns at the beginning. But then, like somehow, around 2016, the trend completely changed. And you can see this, for instance, from the last plot. So what happened? Why this change? Well, this changed because the database itself enforced a new policy on reporting this information in the data that is uploaded. So starting from 2016, you are encouraged, you are forced somehow to report this information. And you can see that this is actually working. So this is like an example of an action that also need to be not only from the people that is using this data, which I mean you can try to debias, to mitigate the bias and so on, but also like prospectively, like the new data that is going to be collected must be collected with information needed already in place and well reported. So based on this experience in the Elixir Biohackathon, we end up with a series of principles that somehow enrich the already existing FAIR principle. The FAIR principle, FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and those are principles for the stewardship of human data. And this is like something that you need to take into account when you are releasing dataset, when you're analyzing the data. So those are principles that for best practices when you are dealing with human data. So we added this X, which means okay, all this, it's okay, but also take into consideration the sex and gender dimension of this data, or any other type of biases, which can be related to race, ethnicity, and so on. So all this is, let's say, accompanied by a series of recommendations that we created that spans from the need of having clear definition of sex and gender, because generally in this reporting are mixed, and this is quite worrying. The needs of standards, of preserving the privacy, the needs of being transparent, and create quality indicators that are also, for instance, easy to use and interpretable. Education, very important to measure the social impact of all those studies, of all those elements, and also engaging with the stakeholders. So the end user, for instance, of those data, or the artificial intelligence systems that are trained on top of those, must be involved in a participatory and multidisciplinary actions that involve also them. And this is, I think, that is very important. So all this type of consideration, together with others, are present in a book that we publish in a collaboration with the the Women's Brain Project. This is a work that was promoted by this Swiss organization, and as you can see, like with the contribution of many other institutions, both from the academia and the industry. And we are really grateful to Londa Schibinger, professor at Stanford University, who wrote the praise to this book. And I would like to highlight this sentence that she wrote, that this is a must read for anyone working in this area, and that the material contained here, all this information that I'm presenting to you today, should be integrated into the medical school curriculum. And going back to the importance of education on this topic of sex and gender bias, this is really a message that we totally approve. This is a bit a look at the structure of the book. It's 3 sections touching upon different topics. In particular, the second one is about specific technologies, and that goes from robotics to neurotechnologies, big data, natural language processing. Is very broad, and it's very comprehensive. And one of those, for instance, just to give you an example, one of those chapters is about fairness and how to define machine learning fairness, which is definitely something not trivial at all and extremely contextual. This is like machine learning fairness is a new area, new discipline that is looking for, in particular, ensuring that the model are trained, are treating all the groups that you might have in a fair way. The definition of fairness, there are many. I'm going to give you just some example. We can have demographic parity. So, for instance, if a classifier is classifying a specific category, we want these percentages of classification to be the same in 2 different groups. Like here, for instance, we have men and women. We can refine this metric by looking at by requiring the same percentages of true positive rate for the 2 groups, and this is called equal opportunity. We can even be more strict and require to the classifier that exactly the same true positive rate and false positive rate is maintained in the two groups, and this is called equalized odds. Those are all different let's say metrics of fairness. There are many others. Those are probably the most popular ones that should be used in different contexts, in different scenarios. This is another important aspect that on how to use those fairness metrics in order to evaluate and to choose the best models, because until now the best models has been chosen just based on the predicted accuracy, as you can see, for instance, in this axis here. But we can also include fairness, and so we can use both metrics, so the accuracy on a test set, but also the fairness on different groups. So in this picture, you can see like different models. We have neural networks, decision tree, random forest, many different models with many different parameters represented in all those clouds of points. And for each one of those different models, we have a specific level of accuracy and a specific level of fairness. By having all this, we can find a Pareto front in order to select what is the best model. And here, the best model is not only the one that has more accuracy, but the one that has the best accuracy and the best fairness. So this is a way of looking at this data. By the way, this data is about fraud exactly, it's a fraud dataset, so it's not applied to healthcare, but the same can be done also in our field. To conclude, we are looking at the data, we are working on the data, we are developing those models, and we have to take into account all this information. But of course, we also need the help of regulators, and the regulators need us to access this information and to know like how to shape the new regulations that can ensure all this fairness and trustworthiness of artificial intelligence system. And indeed, we have been involved in this kind of conversation. We recently wrote a report for the European Parliament. This is actually will be presented in July in Strasbourg, and this report is about the status of bias in datasets that are used for training artificial intelligence systems, and basically what the European Parliament required from us are policy options, so suggestions, hints on things that can be actually be done for real in these regulatory frameworks. This is a collaboration with the University of the Basque Country, and after surveying, reviewing all the state-of-the-art and really delving into the normative frameworks that are actually that are nowadays available for this topic, we ended up with 5 policy options. So the first and the last are somehow related and essentially are suggesting to not create new regulatory frameworks because there are already existing ones, but those ones that are existing, like the currently discussed proposal of Artificial Intelligence Act, need to be really revised, and the aspect of, especially of sex and gender bias, should be introduced there in order to account also for this much more than how it is present in the current version of this proposal. A second policy option is about focusing on data collection. As I hope I convey to you with all those examples, data collection is really important, and all this reporting and having all the information well put in the data that we are using is extremely important. This can be, for instance, ensured by promoting database certifications, and finally, it's also important to strengthen the transparency right of the stakeholders, of the end users of those artificial intelligence systems. So this is, this is about not letting them out, essentially, like to be transparent on how their data is used, how it will be used, and how it has been used until now, because of course, like, those collections of data are very dynamic and they can be used by many different people for many different purposes. So the transparency is very important. So, and with this, thank you so much. And yes, if you have any question, I will be happy to take those questions. Thank you.
In the chat, there is a comment and a question. So the first comment says, I guess that in order to learn how to develop unbiased algorithms, we first need to learn how to specifically bias an algorithm in one of the possible biasing dimensions, sex, ethnicity, age. So I don't know if you have any thought on that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And this refers to the first example that I showed. Now, that was a deliberately biased system that I said it's controversial, but it's interesting in a way, because it really tell us what is the space in which we are moving, like what really, like in that case, the perception of people about those faces is, and from there we can study like the presence of biases, and also biases that we didn't suspect, because that's the most complicated thing to do, like to be aware of biases that we are not aware of, and it's very difficult because it's most of those biases are intertwined and they are mixed, and it's very difficult to disentangle them. So this kind of proposal, like to bias something in order to perturbate something in order to understand all the components, it's okay, but then we need to act upon this, which was something that was absent in that work, and that was the main critique. Yes, and another important thing is that in order to be more aware of biases that we don't suspect, the involvement of all the collectives, of the end users, or the possible unserved communities that will be affected by the use of these systems is important. So they can really tell us how possibly, like what could possibly go wrong with this kind of applications.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. The other one says, on the co-dimension of observations, we need to know how statistically significant those differences are. Supposing that they are statistically significant, what could be the hidden explainers for men being prescribed fewer contraindicated drugs than women? And they say the bias might be the result of a behavioral mechanism introducing a difference in consumption of drugs between men and women.
Yes, so the reasons behind are many, and at different levels. So there are social aspects involved. There are the path that led to the development of this drug. So it's really difficult to reconstruct. What I show you is what we observed at the population level, and this is statistically significant. It's really big numbers. It was in the slide was very dense, but there are the actual numbers of how many people we are talking about, and it's definitely a significant observation. To try to explain the reasons why this is very complicated, and it's an open field of research. This is like a starting observation that we can use in order then to investigate more and go further into the problem. So in that work, there are also like actual list of drugs that I mean we really know what they are, and we see that they have a lot of toxic interactions, and those are co-dispensed with higher probability to women. So we really can go there and see, okay, let's analyze this drug and let's see what's the problem. It can be maybe, I don't know, it can be the way it has been developed, it can be the way it is metabolized in the different individuals. It can be because the drug that is co-administered is maybe like sex specific, like maybe we are talking about drugs that are specific for treating sex specific diseases. This is also another aspect. So, or maybe this is just, yeah, so there might be 1,000 reasons, but this is also like a good opportunity to investigate more about this. It's good to have it observed, this, definitely.
Thank you,
Okay.
So it's my pleasure to introduce the second speaker for this session, Simona Melino. Yep.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I'm particularly happy because she's very much involved as vice president of the Women Brain Project, and as you have heard before from Davide, we have a very fruitful, interesting, and forward-looking collaboration with them. So I'm particularly happy to have Simona here with us today. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, I will share my screen. Let me know when you see it. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, super. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for the invite. Super happy to be here. Today I will be discussing about sex and gender differences in brain and mental health, and specifically some examples of our work currently ongoing or past work at the Women's Brain Project on examples on how to tackle them from different angles. Before we go into the agenda, I just want to have a brief introduction about myself. I am a vice president of the Women's Brain Project. I've been part of the organization since almost inception, so it's now 4 years, I would say. Background in computational chemistry. And within the Women's Brain Project, I serve as a vice president, but also contribute on topics related to technology, such as the book presented by Davide before. So essentially, why do we care about sex and gender factors? Do they matter, and are they considered when we study disease and develop novel treatment solutions? The reality is that the answer to this question is most often no. We have seen that some examples from Davide, but the main problem is that biomedical research is androcentric, despite we are fully aware that there are diseases that can affect women and men in a different manner. What does it mean in practice? This means that the symptoms, how the disease manifests itself, how the disease progresses, what are the treatment effects on women and men can be different, as well as the risk factors, of course. And this is reflected across the entire spectrum, starting from preclinical research. So as David already explained, in preclinical research, mice models findings as of now are heavily influenced by sex, but generally data are not stratified. In clinical development, even in conditions where the prevalence is higher in women, it's often the case that women are less likely to be represented, especially in phase 1 and 2 clinical trials. And the average enrollment rate for women is lower if we look at the statistical data from the FDA-approved drugs. So essentially, we are fully aware that there is a problem, but as of now, there is still no fundamental action to change it, and this is where our work comes in. Examples of why they matter in drug development is, for example, if you look at the statistics in the US, 8 out of 10 drugs withdrawn from the market pose the greater risk for women as compared to men, and this of course can result in increased healthcare costs and spending in obviously having drugs that are less efficacious or that have greater risk for a specific patient population. One not so recent anymore example a couple of years ago of drug that was tested on men and transgender women only and was withdrawn from the market because there was no evidence that the evidence works in women, and this was the case. Essentially, this is where we come into play. Our ambition is really like to leverage sex and gender difference as a gateway to precision medicine. Obviously, we are fully aware that sex and gender are not the only considerations to move towards precision medicine, but we think that they are a fundamental pillar to do so. And this is how the organization was born. The organization was essentially born in 2018 and is a Swiss Verein non-profit organization that was originally born to really research these differences. So the reason why I also wanted to discuss today 4 practical examples is because you will find online a lot of our work that we do from a research bibliographical perspective if you visit our website, one example being the book that Davide presented, as well as another book that we published last year on sex and gender differences in Alzheimer's disease. But the reality is that our strength comes from the fact that we are a multidisciplinary team. So we also have people that come from policy making, medical doctors, we have scientists, we have health economists, and we have a pretty strong network when it comes to collaborations with patient organizations, academia, but also pharmaceutical companies. So essentially, we think that this the topic of sex and gender differences should be tackled from all angles, not just purely from a research perspective. This I already explained. So essentially, what do we want to achieve with the Women's Brain Project? We would like to work on and understand this difference so that essentially we can leverage and understand these differences and improve efficacy, safety profiles, as well as reduction of costs associated to failure of drugs. I will go super quickly to this. Essentially, this is our team. You can see it's a pool of many people, and it's important to see this slide, not because it's important for you to know about the organization, but rather for the examples that I will be presenting. So apart from research and awareness, we are of the opinion that to actually make a change, we not only need to understand the sex and gender difference, but we also need to do other activities such as educating the lay public. For example, in this area, we do a variety of workshops with pharmaceutical companies. We also need to work with the regulators and with policymakers. We work with the technology and AI. And also we are fundamentally aware of all the partnerships that we need to put in place, for example, with pharmaceutical companies, so that that we ensure that the considerations are embedded in their clinical activities and drug development activities. I would like to present you a couple of projects that we have been working on and that present a tangible way on how these differences beyond research activities can be addressed, can be further studied and addressed. One example of a project that we're working on is called the Patient Journey Project on Alzheimer's disease. This is essentially a specific research project which aims to understand all the differences in terms of sex and gender across the Alzheimer's disease patient journey. Why? Because we are aware that in Alzheimer's there are different disease manifestations, from risk to symptoms to prognosis to treatment response, but they are not really evaluated in medical practice. So essentially, what we will do is to understand at every step of this journey what are the pain points and which solutions could be put in place so to help patients throughout their journeys in Alzheimer's disease. Problem for this is also that in Alzheimer's disease, both patients and caregivers face the following issues. They really cannot really communicate so well with patient organizations. They struggle to find relevant information, and sometimes they also struggle to manage appointments and manage their disease holistically. So essentially, this project will be conducted on 400 patients across a range representative of countries, and this will be the results, of course, then will be stratified. So the desired outcome is that we will describe the differences in the patient journey. So to be able to say, okay, these are solutions, these are features of eventually a product that could be tailored according to the specific subpopulation of Alzheimer's patients. And this is a very tangible example. So again, of course, we aim to publish the results of such a study, but the idea will be actually to then, I cannot disclose much, but will be to then design solutions that are that have, for example, digital solutions that have features that were actually specifically designed according to what are the most important pain points for the subset of patients. Another example of project is related to sex differences for digital biomarkers. So essentially, this was a project that has been conducted with a startup as well as with a variety of collaborators. The objective was to explore the role of sex differences in Alzheimer's disease prediction on the basis of digital biomarkers. This is, of course, a practical example again, because the outcome of this work will be a scientific publication, but will also inform then the development of the product of this startup as well. Example number 3, and Davide touched a bit upon it, is also to consider let's say not only the clinical outcomes, but actually how this sex and gender difference can contribute to different economic outcomes, so to say. So another topic that we started recently to work on is an economic modeling exercise conducted with the economists, and the essentially the scope of this project is spanning a variety of neurological conditions. So to really see whether there are differences in costs when it comes to neurological disorders, and by stratifying again the population. Last 2 examples are related to the field of scientific awareness. These are the 2 books that we have published so far. So the first one was Sex and Gender Differences in Alzheimer's Disease, and the second one was the one presented by Davide, so Sex and Gender Bias in Technology and Artificial Intelligence. And essentially, we are in progress in publishing a 3rd book, which is called The Precision Medicine Vaccinates Against Future Pandemics, and we plan to publish it next year. And so this is, I will say, we have touched upon purely scientific projects, engagement when it comes to economic parameters, as well as tangible product solutions based on patient characteristics, as well as scientific awareness. And perhaps the last example is a project that we completed actually last year, which was a hackathon, where we had a pool of students working with us to formulate digital health solutions that can be beneficial for women. For example, one of the shortlisted one was an app for ADHD. And this project, essentially, we had the ideas, and then we plan, provided that we get funding, to develop the product further. So essentially, to summarize, these are examples on how we work in terms of the research piece to really understand, evaluate, elucidate these differences, as well as the collaborations with the entities such as the economist when it comes to the health economics piece, as well as collaborations with the technology providers, consultancies, as well as pharma companies when it comes to develop practical solutions that can address these needs. Having said that, I want to leave a bit of time for questions, given that we have still 5 minutes, and also to say, if you are interested, you can either follow us, you can contact me directly on LinkedIn, because we are always looking for partnership, collaborations, and there are different ways to work with us from a purely partnership research perspective, as well as really working on tangible products together. Or you can send an email to this secretariat email, and we will be happy to reply. Thank you.
Thank you, Simona. So thanks to the two speakers. Maybe I can ask the two of you. I mean, this is a lot of activity in research and outreach, and making this public, and at the scientific level, at the more general level. David touched on how to make this into regulations. So how do you see all this activity progressing, not only to regulation, but also how to create instruments that will help to evaluate these things, whatever these are, bias in the biomedical side, biomedical and artificial intelligence on the methodology, not only providing regulation, but providing instruments to see if these regulations are fulfilled or not. How we progress not only into the political side, but also in the engineering side that will provide information for the political side. And maybe the two of you want to comment on this topic.
Yeah, we had the same audio issue as before, so I couldn't hear you so far, unfortunately. So
Okay, maybe I can start
Yeah.
while the issue is fixed. Yes, I would say that all the possible solutions for benchmarking those you know, methods that are used, that are developed for addressing sex and gender biases, but also like in general, biases in general. So there are many different approaches, many different methodologies that has been proposed in the literature and also implemented in toolkits and a series of you know, libraries and tools that are out there, and you can use it to mitigate or even sometimes remove the bias, detect, mitigate, and hopefully remove the bias. This is useful and this can be done, but as you said, what is missing is like how to evaluate all this, how to evaluate how this is done, if this is done well. And so like finding golden standards and implementing benchmarking frameworks that evaluate all those tools that are available. And there is a lot about this, like there are many different approaches. I show you, for instance, before, like different metrics of fairness, and those were just 3, but there is like a compilation, like a list of different metrics that can be used. So what is missing is really like a benchmarking effort in this direction, and which again is very sensible area because it's very contextual, and probably like this benchmarking specifically for this area should need also the involvement, as we mentioned before, of people that are really like you know, possibly affected by the outcome of the application of those systems. So yes, I would say benchmarking frameworks for evaluating this.
I would agree with David, and I think that also if we look at examples, it's not about really like the methodological approaches that are there, is rather to which extent they are followed. Because, for example, like in the book, when we looked at digital health measures and biases, there is guidance on how to assess those, but to which extent is done then by companies, we don't know. The literature is scarce in this regard.
If I may ask a second question, and it's very much related with one of the topics that you touched upon, Simona, is what is the economical impact of all that? As you surely know, there has been an evaluation of the economical impact of the personalized medicine project in the UK that is now really very important, because now we are not only claiming that personalized medicine will be good for taking care of patients, but also is an economically profitable for the system, make things cheaper. And it's cheaper because you can address better the issues, the people don't have to go around, you save in waiting queues and in unnecessary medical trials or attempts. I guess something similar can be said for the gender and sex bias issues. It is expensive to invest in how to address them, but in return they will be end up producing an economical profit and, for the system, savings for the system. So I wonder if you want to comment a little bit more on this issue, because I think it's, at the end of the day, the more convincing thing for politicians will be if we can demonstrate that at the end of the day this is also economically good for the society.
Exactly, that's exactly it. As in the context of precision medicine, I mean, there is a large chunk of research and investment cost, which is then compensated by better outcomes and so cost savings in the long run. And this is actually what we want to try to do with this project that I was describing with the economists, so to have a better picture of what are really like the investment costs and what will be the components of cost savings, so that this piece of work is sort of complementing the research and clinical understanding with some economic evidence, which will be hopefully also robust enough to justify some policy measures in this regard.
Thank you. That's I think looking forward to see the results of this project. So we have questions from the
Yes, there is a question from the audience. So they say, thanks for the fantastic talks. Regarding policy 2, data collection, does it request that the data is there, or also that it is shared in a structured manner that would allow its systemic analysis? In other words, are there efforts that ensure the reusability of the disclosed variables and information?
Yes, exactly. It's really about that. It's really about that. So and the European Commission, like they are working a lot on creating those spaces for data, also to allow to facilitate the sharing of the data with all the privacy and security aspects in place. So there are, like from an infrastructural point of view, this is ready, and the thing is like to, focus to instill this sex and gender perspective also into the the management of this data, which can just, like, for instance, can just be like implemented in a way like this. The reporting of those categories in the data. This is just like something very simple that can be like implemented. But this should be present in the regulation that is creating those environments, for instance. So it's like, like small things that we can do as a starting point, reusing like maybe infrastructures and ideas that are already circulating in this at that levels, and we can like improve definitely this data collection as well.
Thank you. I have a last question, or a last request for the two of you. I can imagine that there are many young students thinking in what they are going to do, what they're going to do for the PhD or for the master studies. How will you convince them that the sex and gender bias is a good subject of a study, of scientific study? So this is your 30 seconds to convince students to enter in this field.
Okay, I will start. I would just say that this is about you. I mean, no matter if you are a woman or a man, this is about precision medicine, and this is like to, achieve a better service for you, like regardless of your sex, of your gender, like all those categories, like you can belong to any of them. But at the end of the day, if we remove biases for any one of them, we are like giving you the opportunity to have a better healthcare service. So I would say, like, do it for you, really.
Simona, you
No,
may want to
it's-
add something to that.
No, this was a brilliant pitch, so for me it's difficult to add more, but I just wanted to say that, yes, of course it benefits the individual, and I think it's also an exciting area because despite progress in recent years, there is still so much to learn. So I think it's super exciting as a PhD topic.
So there will be work to do. So there will be still good expectations for working in this area. So with this, I think we finish for now. This is only the beginning of this day. So we keep you. I hope you can find this interesting and get engaged with the rest of the activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.